And one of the things that kind of struck me early on, and I'll lead the conversation, unless Paula has like a miraculous recovery, but one of the things that kind of struck me about tonight's pages was just like how much they related to contemporary stereotypes that we're still fighting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you would, and logic would tell me that the stereotypes were probably worse back then than they are now, but the fact that we're still dealing with them. And he parallels, Frantz Fanon, or whoever he is quoting, parallels the stereotype of Jews against the stereotypes of Blacks. And even that goes on, like, you know, stereotyping of Jews. And it just struck me that when will we break? Like, what has to happen for us to break out of stereotypes? You know, it feels like no matter how hard we try, we just can't get out of our own way, and how much we profess of, being like equal societies that are open to everyone. And Frantz Fanon laid out, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, that, that's not the case, and it is not happening, and it doesn't seem like there's any, and bring it up to the present, it doesn't seem like there's any option for that to happen. I just wanted to sort of throw that out to begin the conversation, the whole idea of Frantz Fanon referencing how Black men were perceived as far as their body, with Jews are perceived as far as their intelligence, but their intelligence in a sort of conniving way, not in a healthy way. So yeah, that's where I just wanted to kind of get started, like the whole perception of Black men. And I think he's really referring to Black men. He doesn't refer so much to Black women. This is post-World War II, so there seemed to be like a lot of African soldiers were fighting with the French or in the war. So that seems to be a point of reference. Of course, he himself was Francophone. So yeah, so I don't know if we can start there, if anybody wants to chime in on that, or, bring your own point of view to the discussion.
Okay, well, I'll start. I think one of the things that he was talking about I thought was interesting, the aspects of humanism. And that came into being when he was talking about the Heidegger dialectic. And what's problematic about that I find is here you have Fanon talking about the deconstruction of humanism based on the disillusion of the human Black body, and he's using a European to create that discourse. And so what I found problematic with that is two aspects of Hegelian dialectics. Number one, he uses the history of Greek mythology, and the second, Christian constitutionalism. And we know based on Christian constitutionalism was the embedment of the body being dehumanized. And based on that, I was wondering why he didn't use any African philosophies himself, like the Umbutas, that South African philosophy, that did not come into discourse. And I think that becomes what's problematic about that with the Black body, even in contemporary times, is the lack of humanism. Because even when we look at the Black body in sports, the adjectives and adverbs are used on the Black body, even in sports, shows a animalistic behavior. And that's why he did that comparative analysis of Tarzan and what they fought. They were the missions. They were the ones who were the adventurers. And then us, the Blacks, who they were the opposition. So there's always this contentious binary opposition that happens based on the body, because there's a lack of a human enactment within this self.
You know, recently I participate another book club, Beyond Words, and Barbara Kihani is here. She runs that book club, and we were reading Bell Hooks. And one of the things that struck me, The Will to Change, and one of the things that struck me about that book, and this is kind of referencing your point that Fanon does not refer to the South African philosopher. And one of the things that kind of struck me is that, and I don't know if in his time Fanon was a public intellectual, but it does seem that that writing is different than the writing done for peer review institutions where it is just you're writing a textbook that will be consumed by graduate students. There always feels like, even in Fanon's writing, there feels to be a pop culture thread throughout where he doesn't go too far askew of trying to keep things on a somewhat accessible level. And I just wanted to kind of put that the same way Bell Hooks does the same thing, where she is trying to keep things somewhat accessible. I felt that, like, when Fanon is referencing, I know he references Jesse Owens, I think he references another sort of pop culture
Joe Louis.
figure. What's that? Joe Louis.
Joe Louis.
Right. And it felt intentional. It felt like he was trying to, even all the sexual references, which has a place in the Academy, even that felt like he was trying to speak to us regular, in quotes, regular folk, directly, and give us access to his writing.
That's true, because if you go to 118, he talks about Bigger Thomas. He talks about If He Hollers, Let Him Go. So he's talking about, Native Son, and If He Hollers, Let Him Go, which was, they were nonfictions. But he also talked about the body even back then, the Black body in image production.
Right. And he continues on the Black body throughout, and I'm just trying to bring up something really quick. He continues to talk about the Black body, but again, Black women aren't really mentioned, but he is mentioning white women as far as either they're over-sexualized, and white men do this also, like over-sexualizing the Black body, or building fear around the Black body, where you don't want to. I think there's a reference of a white woman getting an exam by a Black man, a Black doctor, and the woman says some offhand remark that the doctor overhears. But this didn't hit me until I'm having this conversation now. And maybe it comes up later. I did not read fully through the chapter. There's still some pages left. Black women aren't in this chapter, which feels like open to having a theme around Black women. He doesn't introduce women, at least into this chapter, and it feels purposeful that he does that. And I just, whether he was just solely focused on the Black male, or white people as they not just view Black people, but specifically the Black man. Maybe that was his intent.
I mean, that's kind of overlooking at all of these writers and thinkers going back for a long time were accused of, is just the overlooking of Black women. I mean, the same accusation could be levied against going back as far as Frederick Douglass. It's levied against a lot of the Black Panthers. It's levied against a lot of these types, anti-colonial types, where they don't have that same framework where they're including women in their analysis. I mean, it's just this blind spot that comes up again and again, which is why I even brought up last week. It's when we went over the chapter that we skipped from the first week, I was saying it half facetiously, but half seriously as well. It's like, yeah, there's less digging into an interrogation of what Black women are doing, because it's like, all right, who cares what they're doing? Yeah, white man with a Black woman. It's like we spend all this time, it's like, oh, the Black man with white women. It's like, because it's loaded with obviously a lot of history, which isn't to say that the other combination isn't also loaded with its own history. It's just that it is willfully overlooked in a lot of circles, and I think it's a blind spot for a lot of these guys. And notice I'm saying these guys, saying it a bit casually, because it's like it's showing their own bias as mostly cis men writing about these topics, that they're just overlooking Black women in their framework.
I think it's beyond overlook. I think what it is there's a universal discourse. When you say Black man, the woman was automatically included. Unfortunately, that was the case. And if we look at ourselves, even within the slavocratic relationship, what do? A Black woman worked just as hard as the Black man. There was no difference in labor. Therefore, there's no difference in a sexual separation. They are the same. And when we look at Frederick Douglass, what did he do? He helped the women's suffrage. But guess who did not get the right to vote? Black women. So it's always been a removal of Black women. Even now, when you hear a lot of discourse, we're not added into that game. We're not added into that talk. So this is something that has been very patriarchal in our community, but hasn't been accepted globally on an overall construct that needs to be deconstructed. But we still have to go back to the context of this time and what Fanon was all about. Remember, he was married to a white woman. Ain't so much he gonna say.
Did not know that.
Well, I would agree with you that it's about patriarchy. That's what came to mind for me. That it's the world is run by men, and it's so hegemonic, so that even a Black man like Fanon is just steeped in patriarchy. She's steeped in the assumptions that when you say Black man, you mean Black women. Feel no need to study this what's specific to the oppression of Black women in that context that he's talking about, colonial, oppression. And it is interesting that the only time he talks about Black women is when he talks about the Martinican, Antillean Black woman who wants to be a white woman. Even in this last chapter, he refers back to the Black, I don't know if it was the Black prostitute or who just sees herself as white skin with, pink cheeks. That's the only way he addresses Black women, is in the context of them wanting to be white. But even in that section, there is a section there where he talks about when he talks about matrilineal, he's talking about the European child is raised in the European family that is congruent with the European nation. But then the Black child is raised in a European, nation. And when he becomes an adult, it's not congruent. And that's where he starts to talk about the difference between the European nation is patriarchal and the Black nation is matrilineal. But that would be a great opportunity. I mean, it was like he knew about it. It wasn't like he didn't realize this,
right.
and have some sense of a really important distinction between the culture of Africa or Black families, but that didn't draw him into kind of going further to be able to make individual statements about what does it mean to have a matrilineal, to be for women, to be in charge of the Black family, and kind of open that up. And
as they are.
yeah, so that's interesting, that, you know, that he wasn't led to do that. And as other people are saying, he is so European raised himself. He's the very Black man that he is describing as the Antillean Black man who just, you know, is raised to think of himself as French and just incorporates everything that's French in his worldview and his understanding. And then goes to Paris and realizes, boom, you know, like, oh no, they don't, you know, you're actually Black, you're not French. But he himself is just immersed in European culture, like, you know, who he quotes and his very way of, you know, anyway, you know,
I agree. I agree with you. It's like, it's almost hard to read. Just the way that just like, you know, I think just like everyone's saying, I mean, Black women, it doesn't even seem like they exist to him in his world. It doesn't even, I mean, it doesn't even come up. He doesn't make any reference to them in any way. I think someone was saying, we were talking about bell hooks and, you know, and slavery. And that was one of the issues, is that in Africa, all the work, you know, like, you know, male slaves, it was like women's work. Like that was one of the big, you know, things for them, or the issues of, you know, the labor, I guess, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it wasn't things that, you know, men in Africa did, if that makes sense. But I know it's just getting hard to read with him. Because like you said, it's just, he is the Black man he's talking about. Like he just really seems like he just wants to be a white man. And it's just, I don't know. And the more and more I read, it just becomes more and more clear. And he's a good writer, and I mean, he makes some good points, but he's actually really wordy. He's very wordy. He takes a long time to say, you know, one thing, but, you know, I would want to hear more about Black people as a whole, or also maybe some of his solutions to all of these things. If that makes sense.
The one thing that struck me, and I kind of feel the same way, what has sort of resonated in my head is, this is the legendary Fanon that people have talked about like my whole life as somebody I must read, and he's not including women. That just struck me. And again, I didn't think about this until we're having this conversation. Is it just black men who are elevating Fanon? You know, I don't know in my past who has told me to read Fanon. Many people have, but I'm wondering now, have they all been Black men who have told me to read, you know, Fanon? And whether Black women are like, nah, don't read Fanon. Read someone else. Read bell hooks.
Well, the first time I read this book was 1976. And the reason why we were told to read it is because it's considering a post-colonial thought. Here is a Black man that's standing in front of white folks and saying, I'm gonna tell you what I think. Remember back then, that could get you killed. That could get you walking down the street. They could kill you, walk away, and step over your body. That's the bottom line. So what is, I think the purpose for Fanon, and this is where I've come from, it is that he creates a conversation that never occurred before. Okay, here it is. This problematics, absolutely, all the way through the book. Thing that always bothered me, how are you going to be a psychiatrist, bring in philosophy, try to bring in history, make up your mind where you want to go with this? Because he's all over the place. You know, he's bringing in fiction. I mean, he's in the States, he's in Africa. Where you want to go, son? Just go there. So that was the thing, the problematic for me. But what this book did, it made an aha moment for a lot of people to go, wait, I can write about that. Because before, we never thought about even writing about that. We would write history books. History books were being read because this was one of the first books that in Black history and universities that were used. We didn't have them before. So that's where it came from. Is it problematic? Oh, yes, by all means. I just have a problem with the brother 1,000 times. But he's got, like you said, he's got some interesting points, Rod.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was going to say that, you know, I've been political since I was 16 years old. I was a political activist for 40 years, a full-time political activist. And we read Wretched of the Earth. That's what
Oh,
I read in
yeah.
1972. And it's a very different book. And
Yeah, it
I had heard about Black Skin, White Masks, but it wasn't the book that the political movement was reading. The book the political movement was reading was Wretched of the Earth, because it was about revolution. It was, Fanon was in Algeria when he wrote that book. He
Yeah.
lived in Algeria. He became a Marxist in Algeria.
Yeah.
He was writing about the Algerian Revolution, about the revolution, the uprising, the independence movement against colonialism. And he wasn't writing it from a psychological perspective. Black Skin, White Mask is written from a psychological perspective. And it's a psychoanalytic perspective, which even today is outdated. Back then, it was the way of thinking psychologically, was to think psychoanalytically. Freud, the sexual unconscious, and the instinct, and the neurosis, and all those words, that's psychoanalysis. And I don't understand it. And I'm a therapist, and I'm reading him, and I am like lost in his language, his psychoanalytic language. And so I think that's a distinction I make, is that Wretched of the Earth was a political book.
Yeah.
And it was talking about and discussing, quote, the violence of revolution, like the violence of these wars against French colonialism. And that's why it became a handbook. It was a handbook. We read it. In the Black Panther Party, they taught it, in the Young Lords and all the political movements, we were reading Wretched of the Earth because it was a manual for revolution. And on the other hand, this is what we're reading for this, book club now. It's in some ways, it's maybe even more profound, because he's trying to engage philosophy and the understanding of the mind and the emotionality and the complex. And it is a very profound book. I just found it extremely hard to read because it's written in this very patriarchal European, academic, intellectual way. And I think that's why Wretched of the Earth was much more popular, because it was a popular reader and anybody and everybody could read it and understand it. Anyway.
Thank you. There's a passage here when he's talking about psychoanalytical interpretations of the Black myth, and he says the Black man is phobogenic, is a phobogenic object provoking anxiety, from the patient treated by, and I'm going to mess these names up, Ceru or Capris, to the girl who admitted to us that she would be terrified to sleep with a Black man. Yeah. We encounter every stage of what we shall call Black phobogenesis. Much has been said about psychoanalysts and the Black man. Wary of how it can be applied, we prefer to call the chapter The Black Man in Psychopathology, seeing that neither Freud nor Adler nor even the cosmic Jung took the Black man into consideration in the course of his research. And that kind of like goes back to some of the points that both you and Greg made about him being more psychoanalytical in this, but also referencing these sort of traditional Freud and Jung and other early therapists. And I'm just wondering, like, has any of this changed? Like this whole idea, that the way Black people are perceived is tied into, who we are psychically and psychoanalytically I haven't looked up phobogenetic yet, but I think it's like something to phobias and genes.
Yeah. I think that it still exists. I think what he was doing was coming on a clear path of understanding the phobias that the dominant has with us in their presence. And this was a way of him creating a terminology to try to create a new discourse that became a bit problematic in its in the space even back then. But I do believe that one of the things that's problematic with him, and I'm gonna say it again, he keeps using Europeans to try to deconstruct Black issues. You can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. You just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't fry my chicken in fish grease. I gotta fry my chicken in chicken grease.
You can though.
No, you don't want to. Trust me, you don't want to do that.
It wouldn't taste good. It wouldn't taste good. It doesn't taste good.
No, you don't want to do that. You upset folk now.
Right, because he's a Frenchman. He's the same person he's describing, like the colonial of the Antilles is raised to be French, and he himself was raised to be French. And it's like you're saying, he's using a European, Eurocentric, European way of seeing the world to try to address what the Black person, Black man is about, but all his structure of his language and his ideas are European, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Do you think it's a biology? Do you think this is a bibliography of him?
Yes. Yes, I think he just wants to explain his wanting to be white, and he just wrote a whole book about it. I just feel he makes good points. Like again, and I was even like looking. One point he did make that makes a lot of sense. He was saying, about comics and movies and different things. They're written by white men for white children. He's like, Mickey Mouse and all those kind of games. And he said, basically like the evil characters in all books, the wolf, the devil, the wicked genie, evil and savage, are always represented by Blacks or Indians. And since one always identifies with the good guys, the little Black child, just like the little white child, becomes an explorer, an adventurer, and a missionary who is in danger of being eaten by the wicked Negroes. And the thing is, it's like, it's true, in a way you do, right? You do root for, and like you play cowboys and Indians. Everybody wants to be, right? Nobody wants to be the Indian, even though we're the Indians, right? But so I mean, right? He makes, but he makes some good points about that you do internalize racism, and that people of color, we have it too. We connect to that as well. But I just wouldn't have written a whole book about it. I just wouldn't have.
I also wanted to remind us that Frantz Fanon, I'm looking it up. He was 27 when he wrote this book.
Yeah.
He died when he was 36 years old.
Yeah.
So this, well, I'm just thinking about everything we're saying about how pompous it is, and, but in some ways he was 27 years old. He was such a young person. Yeah. He had done a lot of this research for his doctorate. He's like immersed in academia. And then you see that difference when he becomes the ambassador of Ghana to Algeria, and then he changes. It's like I'm not saying he changes completely as a person. He matures. He becomes more worldly. So I just wanted to remind us that he was 27 when he wrote this book.
Was Wretched of the Earth written after Black Skin?
Wretched of the Earth was published in 1961.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
So
right just before he died. It came out just before he died. And I just read this stuff on Wikipedia in the last week or two, just trying to like immerse myself in who was he.
But the other thing that's interesting about it too is that he did study Marxism. And I found that to be interesting.
Well, he became a Marxist.
Yeah, but the study of Marxism he placed it in this book as well. So there's always been that undercurrent relationship with him of that revolutionary act. But what become problematic about it is we know Marxism didn't work for Black folk either.
But I think, like Greg was saying, they were all young.
Yeah.
Like Malcolm X was young.
Yeah.
You know, Martin Luther King was Jr. was young. So it's not just youth. I mean, it could be, but I mean, the Black Panthers were young.
Tell me about it.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's not just that.
Well, what I mean by that is that he's unformed. Like that if he had lived another 40 years, like he might have had more opportunity to mature and to, you know, see the world in a different way, discover the things that we're talking about, you know, be impacted and influenced by the women's movement. You know, I mean, he died in 61. By 1970, we have Bell Hooks, and we have Alice Walker, and we have all these, you know, Black feminism and, you know, the Black feminist collective. I mean, we just have all the stuff that's happened in the 70s. If he had lived another 20 years, just another 20 years, who knows how his thinking would have been influenced and changed.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that, because the other thing you had is the Camboree as well. Yeah. And the Camboree, where the Caribbean movement, feminist movement, was a whole nother platform that kind of gets sideswiped when it comes to feminism, but it's critical. And I'm bringing that up, big up, because I'm Jamaican. So big up, big up, big up.
I know there was a book recently written about that collective. I can't remember. I'm trying to look it up now.
River Collective?
What's that, Greg?
Are you talking about the Combahee River Collective, or are you referring to, because I believe, I'm sorry, your name's not on the thing, so apologies if I'm not referring to you by name. She was saying the Combahee. That's a different thing, I imagine.
I got you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. But it is interesting that, you know, considering that he died so young and he wrote this book so young, he probably didn't have enough time to get out of his own patriarchy. Like, he didn't live long enough. He was just too young. And just like you said, Anais, he was just too young to have these kind of experiences that would have informed him as an older man. But thinking about that and thinking of all the people we just named, whether it's Frederick Douglass, I don't know, Frederick Douglass lived into his 70s, I believe. But Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Young Lords, the Black Panthers, they all end, whether they die or disband, relatively young. Like, none of these people or movements are allowed to, and I say that purposefully, allowed to, you know, to get any experience or age. You know, they're killed, or somehow systemically they are disbanded. You know, whether it is the Panthers or the Young Lords or any other organization, they all tend to have a good 5-year run where they get a lot done, and then that's it. Then it's no more. And it feels like the same could be said about Fanon. Like, maybe he had he started relatively young, but maybe he had like a good 10-year run. And I mean, he's different. He did die of natural causes, but or he died of an illness. So I guess that kind of makes that different.
Yeah, I mean, the counterinsurgency also we have to bear in mind was particularly ruthless, right? In the late 60s. And then by the 70s, it was when the counterinsurgency completely eliminated all these movements. You know, this is governmental, obviously backed, white supremacist. And the intellectuals, I want to say they were left alone, because they certainly were on all the lists, right? The FBI list, they were watched, they were surveilled. It was the ones that were really the academics mixed in with the action that were obviously targeted for killing, like, you know, our Fred Hamptons and Malcolm X's and things like that. So he might have made it to an older age, I'm sure, but I would say, I would warn against the assumption that he would develop some sort of more feminist, hospitable to feminist analysis. We can't assume it happens that way. It might, But as these intellectuals get older, if anything, they kind of get more set in their ways. Even someone great like Baldwin, right? He has blind spots for feminism. That discussion with Nikki Giovanni is just a perfect example of that. Like he didn't, you know. And then the other ones who kind of age more gracefully. I mean, Kwame Ture is one who reached a pretty, you know, up there age.
He
But
died
then
of
again,
natural
even with him, I
causes.
mean, I can't say I'm too well versed in his feminist perspective. I'll gladly be corrected if you could point to something. But like anti-imperialist, sure, through and through. But he didn't really have that framework either. So, you know, with age doesn't always mean that this added analysis is going to come.
I'm keeping hope alive for myself. Here's another part of the book. And for those of you who just joined us and was expecting Paula wasn't feeling well this evening. So I decided to actually do some work. So thank you everybody who came. And I'm reading this from the book. Over a 3 or 4 year period, we Fanon, working with a group of other people, we questioned over 500 individuals from France, Germany, England, and Italy who were all white. We managed to create a certain trust, a relaxed air in which our subjects would not be afraid to confide in us, or were convinced that we would not, or that they would not offend us. Or else during free association tests, we would insert the word Negro among 20 other words. Almost 60% gave the following answer: that Negro was the equivalent. When they thought of Negro, they thought biological, sex, strong, athletic, powerful boxer, Joe Louis, Jesse Owens, Senegalese infantrymen, savage, animal, devil, sin. Where do you, like, so we're critiquing Fanon as sort of being in his page, and I can't get past this for some reason. And even when we read other nonfiction books by men, there always seems to be that same theme. It would be interesting to know, like, sure, they say 500 individuals, but it's a good chance they were probably 500 men. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but I
didn't think he asked women. You know, that's crazy you even say that, because I'm like, oh, of course he interviewed men. Doesn't it say it right here? And I look back, I'm like, he doesn't say men. He just said members of the white race, and he names off French, German, English, and Italian. But my assumption was like, oh, of course they were men. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm lapsing into it.
But why doesn't, I mean, there might be books that are written now that are critical of Fanon. Yes, he is young, he's a young man. I get that. He has certain aspirations within the academy. I definitely understand that. But just in the gathering of data, you would think that would tell you that you need to be more broad. And again, I know patriarchy and how that sort of manifests in the academy or academy adjacent. But why? Like, why is he, again, just interviewing? And I'm making an assumption, 500 men, you know, of European descent. And what he gets out of this must be what he already knew. Like, he must have known the answer that would come when you ask, you know, free association of the word Negro, or you know, what you perceive as Negro.
No, I agree, Ron. Like, right, you didn't need 500 people to get an answer that you already knew for the time period, for your, you know, again, right, it's, you know, he makes good points, but then again, he just says things that people already have said, or it's already been said, or it's, you know, he talks about sex and Black men and sex and with white women and, you know, different things, and, you know, the Black body. And again, I'm thinking of the book in context of the year that it was written. So I guess this was new.
52.
Right. Yes. I mean, these are new ideas or new, you know, things. But when he says stuff, you know, the Black man, he is a penis. Or, you know, he's always, you know, in a very sexual way, so, you know, by sexual power. And, you know, I mean, for him to be a Black man, I mean, I don't know, he should understand that these are myths, whether, I don't know if that makes sense, what I'm saying, if it makes sense. Like, yeah, it seems like almost that he likes the idea of this, that it doesn't bother him as much as he's either saying, or I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm trying to, you know, get an idea. But yeah, he just, you know, his sexual power and that it impresses white men.
And I don't think he's not stating anything that society hasn't already told us that thinks that way. Would it make a difference if he asked white women? Like, if he asked white women, you'd get the same answers, is the way I see it.
Well, he doesn't want to ask Black women because he won't get the same answer.
Oh, no, yeah, he's not going to bother with them now. Yeah. But that's the thing. There's that part in this chapter, which, forget finding it. This was a very long chapter, and like it was losing me at certain points. But he does talk about the difference between anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism, that the Black male, right, gets lynched and castrated. But for anti-Semitism, they're interested in sterilizing the women so that they won't further their race. And I thought that was very telling. So for the Black man, it's an attack on their corporeal sense, their body, that we're going after here because of the threat it poses, right? The idea of the penis, it's that powerful in the white psyche. And it's something that, you know, we need to take its power away at any sense. But this is where all the fears of, you know, invading the precious white women and all that stuff that we talked about in past weeks as well. So I thought that was very telling. You even said it too with the attack on the Jews. It's their intellectual prowess is the threat, but we do need to exterminate them, but through sterilizing the population. But Black men, it's like, no, they need to be eviscerated, disemboweled. Though this is the most horrific things you could do to the body, because the body is the threat. So that's where that obsession with the penis comes in that sense. I don't think he's far off.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, that white men do feel because of the way they think about Black men, it's like it is a threat to the white man's penis. You know, like, there's a reason why it's white men are the patriarchy, white men are the one who have the power, and white men see their position in the world through their penis. So it makes sense to me that they would be threatened by the Black man's penis, because it's kind of, they're in competition with how they, the essence of what they think a man is when it comes down to it. I think white men, their penis is what's most important. You know, whether it's Donald Trump, you know, or whoever. I mean, it's interesting how much he personified the white man's focus on their penis. And so I'm just thinking of that based on what you were just saying just now, Craig.
Yeah.
I think it is the reason why he chose 500, because he wanted to make his point. He wanted to when you do data, you know about data collecting, you have to have X amount of numbers before it's considered legitimate. So I think this was an opportunity to show the legitimacy of what he was talking about. You know, that the fact, yeah, I got 500 white boys to say this, so it's gotta be right. And that was where that ended. I think of the idea with the penis aspect, I think that white men want power. And they feel that the Black body ultimate relationship to power is procreation. And that is one of the reasons, particularly here in the Middle America during the slavocratic system, that they subjugated Black men to marginalizing places of dehumanization, and made sure that the Black female was always in possession of them. They were always in their possession one way or another. Either you're going to be in the house one way, you're going to be in the bed one way, but we're going to control that body. So one body was disemboweled, the other one was controlled. And all that is about power. We even see what happened in Buffalo. That was about power. Yeah, they hate us, but that was power. Because now I've intimidated not only a group of people or community, the nation.
We're referring to the perception of Black body. There is a passage, I think it's on page 149, and Fanon is quoting someone. Racial jealousy is an incitement to crime, to crimes of racism. For many white men, the Black man is precisely that magic sword, which, once it has transfixed their wives, leaves them forever transfixed. My statistical sources have been unable to prove me with figures on this topic. Yet I have known a number of Black men and Black women who knew Black men and Black women who knew white men. I don't understand that. I have been confided in enough to regret that Monsieur Corneau applies his talent to reviving the fable in which the white man will always find a specious argument. And they call this argument shameful, dubious, and therefore doubly effective. So again, it's that ongoing sort of demonization of Black men, and we finally get at least a tangential reference to Black women. So thank you so much. And even like when Fanon is not sort of referencing Black men, he is talking about Jews, which also felt, I don't want to say it was inappropriate, but he's putting Jews on like a parallel to Black people. And I definitely understand, but he doesn't reference the Holocaust. So I definitely understand, you know, the historic, I don't want to reuse Holocaust, but you know, the issues that have faced Jews are horrific. The issues that have faced Black people are horrific, but I don't know if he had to sort of make that parallel argument. I mean, I think what he's really talking about is that when Black people are stereotyped, they are stereotyped around their bodies, but when Jews are stereotyped, they are stereotyped around this sort of connivingness to infiltrate banks and government. It feels like he could have made his argument without paralleling it to a certain extent. Make his argument around Black issues without paralleling them to Jews. It felt a little gratuitous to me.
Well, you know,
Now go ahead, Anais.
I was going to say, we talked about this a little bit last week. Actually, Paula opened up the conversation. We're talking about or referencing his reference to Jews. And in the section we were reading about Jews being othered. And that's why I think well, there's two reasons why I think he's using it. Well, it's really one reason. I do think he's very much influenced by the Holocaust. And I think that is why Jews are so prominent in this book. He's writing This is published in 52. It probably took him a few years to write the book. This is right after World War II. I think it was, you know, enormously impactful around the world to discover all the Jews that got, you know, murdered and in the concentration camps. And he does make a point when he's starting to talk about Jews in the first few chapters, where he talks about the phenomena of othering them, that the only way they could be murdered in the numbers was that they were othered. And that's what it means to other somebody is to make them not human.
Yeah.
And that's the parallel I think he's using. You know, that the treatment of Blacks, Africans, over the 400 years, it is the only reason you could do that and walk away is because you have made them not human. And that's what happened with the Jews, is that they were made not human so that you could do everything that happened to the Jews, the slaughter of the Jews in World War II.
Can I counter that,
Sure.
Anais, that maybe, because I think you brought it up earlier, that he probably identifies more, Fanon probably identifies more European than Black. He may have been buying into he himself may have been buying into Jewish stereotypes. That's why he includes it in the book, not out of empathy, but aligning himself again with like the European way of thinking about Jews. Not with less empathy and more, you know, like he doesn't say this, of course, but you know, he might himself believe that. I mean, he hasn't said it up until what we've read so far. And you know, that would be sort of catastrophic if that's his.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think it's like he's espousing it. I think because he believes it, not that he's not influenced by it, because we're all influenced by all of, you know, whether it's classism or racism, or we're all influenced by it. But I really do think that he does talk about that whole notion of othering and that dehumanizing people. And that's, I guess, what I think, that it comes out of that.
Yeah, on page, and I'm referencing page 158 in the book. The Jew, be him authentic or inauthentic, is labeled as salud. I'm not exactly sure, it must be a French word. Somebody help me out. Such is the situation that anything he does is bound to turn against him. For naturally, the Jew can decide who he wants to be, and he can even forget his Jewishness, hide it from himself. He thus recognizes the validity of the Aryan system. And that feels a little more critical, you know, coming from Fanon than empathetic. I mean, I think it is true that it is easier, because Judaism is a religion, it is easier to hide, you know, if you're a Jew than if you are Black. So there, you know, there might be some context for that, but I don't know if that's sort of filled with empathy, you know, like as it relates to him, you know, witnessing what happened in the Holocaust and just believing wholly that, you know, this is one of the great travesties of mankind. That, you know, again.
Even though in that section you just read, I read it as he is, because the Jew can hide himself, that Jew who hides himself is, the Jew who hides himself is the one who is recognizing the validity of their Aryan system. I think it's the same as when he said, then everything he writes after that, you know, let us no longer be Jews, I'm no longer a Jew, down with the Jews, is the Jew who decides not to be Jewish, to hide it. And it's self-hate. And that's what he talks about the Antillean, you know, Black, you know, learns to be European and learns to, you know, validate whiteness and want to be white and want to marry a white woman. And I see it as a parallel. It's the Jew who stops being, who hides himself, that this is about self-hate.
Yeah, yeah. But with Black people, there's always that black skin that
definitely.
for the most part, we did read Passing again with, this is Beyond Words Night. So we did read Passing with Beyond Words Book Club. So we do know that it is possible, but for the most part, you know, if you're Black, you're Black.
And he says it earlier in the book, you know, that the Jew can hide himself, but the Black person can't.
Yeah, yeah.
I think on an overall, Fanon was internally oppressed, and he had some serious internal oppressive situation that he needed to recover from himself. And you can read it over and over again. That became a bit problematic. I think that drawing from it from a Blackness perspective, though, it does allow me now in 2022 to see what you and I, Ron, were talking about previously. Ain't nothing changed. Ain't nothing new under the sun.
I think it was you. I'm sorry. In your, you have WCPSCN. Can you share your name?
Yes, my name is Loretta Green, but WCPSCN is my nonprofit organization, and they actually own they own it, but I use it.
Okay.
Loretta.
Can we call you Loretta or Miss Green?
Please call me Loretta.
Okay.
Call me.
All right.
Just call me. You know, certain things you don't call me because I'll call you out. But other than that,
I'll keep that in mind.
All right.
But like you said, Loretta, before we talked, and I was like, please don't say any more because I'm going to use up all my conversation before I even start the book club. But we were talking about what happened in Buffalo, and I think things have. So just personally, once I hear it one time, I don't want to hear that Buffalo thing over and over. So I tend not to watch it on the news or do any kind of seeking out pictures or anything. But I know that there were other killings around the country, like 5 people were killed somewhere else and 10 people were shot. Is that still the extension? And related to Buffalo, it definitely was, because he has, you know, a history of racism, but are we still dealing with the issues? I mean, we are still dealing with the issues that Fanon wrote about all those years ago. But to what extent have we, God forbid, thank Fanon for helping us make progress towards this better society that we live in? I don't know if anyone agrees that this is a better society, but a lot has changed since Fanon wrote, you know, these 2, Wretched of the Earth and Black Skin, White Mask. And I'm just wondering, like, how much do we, I don't know, I don't want to say we lay at his feet, because I don't know how influential any of these books are, or for that matter, you know, books that Angela Davis has written, Bell Hooks has written, you know, like we're still going through issues. It's usually white patriarchy, white cisgender patriarchy, you know, that we're dealing with these issues. And I'm just even, you know, I was don't watch Charles Barkley. I happened to be watching an interview with him last night. He's such a, I don't know what he is, but just don't listen to him. He was like blaming, Black people for Black crime. Like, so anytime somebody presented something around, police killing Black people, he would mention Black people killing Black people. When there's, so many greater societal issues that lead towards that kind of violence. And I'm just wondering, like, have we progressed from that, from the point of Fanon was writing to now? Like, can we lay any of this at the writing that Fanon was doing, or is it just a different sort of tact that we have not or have taken to get us to this point?
I think in the case.
No, I'm sorry, Loretta.
Go ahead, Loretta, then Rachel.
I think in the case of internal oppression, I think that we're still there in some degrees. And one of the reasons is because we haven't gotten to the point that we can really deal deeply into those real critical questions that need to be open and responded to. I say for a general conclusion of America, one of the biggest problems we have is we have a wound that will never heal. You cannot put a topical on a wound that needs surgery. We need to open up that wound, go into surgery, then let the surgeon do his deal. So from an internal perspective for Black folks, Barkley, I'm with you. I don't mess with him because I don't want to lose my religion. I don't want to have to cuss him out. So I don't go there, because his whole thing, you talk about internal oppression, look at him. When you deflect to that degree where you will not accept anything about other than what makes you feel better about you, there's a problem. And that's where I see that, where that is. Fanon, he had internal oppressive issues that allows us to open the door and go, oh, wow, look, that is happening. Because you remember when he wrote it, we weren't looking at it. We looked at a collective, but we didn't look at an individualistic perspective to it. So what the dominant was doing to us in this Black body, we never addressed it, except when we had the march, the anti-lynching march here in New York. That was really the first time we addressed that Black body being destroyed collectively. So what he did is he allowed those discourses to happen that other post-colonialists were able to come in and draw from and write about. And they have. Manny Marable, he's one of them, because he's talking about post-colonial anthropology, may he rest in peace. And there's so many others that were able to draw from this, but it had to start from somewhere. So as problematic as it is now, then it opened doors. Where we're going, who are your writers that are drawing from them? You see, you have to have begots. So who's begotten Fanon and moving it to the next level? That's what we have to look at. And then from a universal perspective, we as Americans, we getting ready to get slapped in the butt big time, because I already heard the word Europe ain't coming. So there's a whole lot of dollars we're gonna lose behind our mess.
Rachel, did you
No, I was thinking about, I think that this book is very current, and I don't know if anybody read the ISIS papers, like when she talks about like a lot of the things, some of the things he's saying have, it reminds me of that. It reminds me of the ISIS papers and the Black man's penis and what it really represents for the white man, and that it's not just necessarily about sex, but power and this fear of, the white man and the Black man and all the things that happen because of that and all the different symbols within, but so I mean, I do think it's current. I do think he comes up with a lot of good points, but again, I would want him to have more solutions for this than just the talking and the psychoanalyzing. I'm like, what's next? So you talk to 500 people. Did you try to change what they thought? Are you compiling this information to do what with it? I think that's just the issue for me.
And that's the That's the issue for most intellectuals. You write about topics, but you don't necessarily have the answers. I once heard, what's his name now? Ta-Nehisi Coates says, I ask questions that I don't have answers to, but just in the asking of the question sort of helps, propel the dialogue to people who might have the answers to those questions. So sometimes, it is not, it is great when they do have an answer, but, sometimes they just have questions. And those questions can be book length at times. Page 166, deep down in the European subconscious has been hollowed out an excessively black pit where the most immoral instincts and unmentionable desires slumber. And since every man aspires to whiteness and light, the European has attempted to repudiate this primitive personality, which does its best to defend itself. When European civilization came into contact with the Black world, with these savages, everyone was in agreement that these Black people were the essence of evil. And prior to this, he is sort of, again, continuing along the line of how we see and formulate, let me take that, not how white people, how society sees and formulates sort of stereotypes around Blackness. Even in his, and again, I'm giving him some space. He's a scholar, like I said, he doesn't have to have answers, but you would think that he would offer some feedback. One of the things that you can respect about Bell Hooks is sometimes her points are really short and she's all over the place, but she does offer feedback from time to time. She will reference her, like in All About Love, she constantly referenced her family and her relationships and, her extended family and how they sort of, raised their children, or how the relationship between herself and her father and her siblings. But we don't really get that from Fanon. And that doesn't, comparing the two is unfair, I know, but it seems that Fanon could have offered a more personal point of view to make some of his points. And not doing so, he kind of leaves it open for this sort of criticism that we've been having of him, that he, maybe in his desire to align with like Europeans, he might have been anti-Semitic. He definitely, had some patriarchy issues. And it feels like if he had just presented his own sort of personal views, the book would have been more palatable.
I think that's also speaks to Bell Hooks' ability to be accessible, more accessible at least. Which isn't to say that every book she's ever written is accessible, but some I would say are easier entry points for people than others. And in addition to that, she is more open to being vulnerable. Whereas Fanon, I think, is a lot more of the, no, I'm going to cite my Sartre and Manoni, and like, you're going to get every single person I've ever read because I'm going to cite them here. I don't see him going into like, all right, now let me dwell on my life to show you why. I think there's that remove, I think, comes from that academic point of view, where he's like, you're going to get all these citations of the people that I've studied. And Bell Hooks is more of like, well, I want you to come into my world and I'm going to show you why my theory is worth listening to based on, yes, she cites as well, but She also adds her personal experience, and she does it, I think, in a far more accessible manner. So I think this is two very different figures.
Could it be
I think
because
that-
she's a woman? Could it be because women just, because of the way we are, come into the world?
It's the way
and-
she writes. Because
I'm just saying all the women. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
her capacity, does it also come from her being a woman? Her ability to be more vulnerable and speak from her heart rather than just intellectually.
I love her doorbell, but I think what she does is she likes to give personal references because it draws you into her dialogue a lot more. Even her academics, she puts herself in there. She's very vulnerable when she writes, and that's why it's so relatable. I think in his case, this was just an added extension to his dissertation because it reads like a dissertation. I mean, the part that was rejected, but it reads, I got a couple of those that wasn't accepted. I'd love to publish, but anyway, that's what I think it was.
Do you think in writing a dissertation, and I know that many dissertations are published for in quotes for the public, but do you think maybe I haven't read anything about how Fanon sort of looked back on this book, but may there been regret in letting this book out into the public?
I think it was just cocky. That's all. I think it was cocky. He think he knew everything. I mean, how many Black psychiatrists were able to publish back in the day? He was like one of none. So he was cocky.
Anais, were you going to say something?
No, I was asking, but now I don't remember what I was asking. Something you just said, Ron.
It just kind of strikes me, and you probably are right, Loretta, that there weren't many Black psychologists, particularly publishing on an international. And again, I don't know how the book was received as far as where it was published and released when it was first written, but the mere fact that he is from this hemisphere, the Caribbean, but he is also centering his thought in Europe, France, Northern Africa, kind of gives him this sort of international feel that he is again, because how we value Europe, that if you are writing, if you're from the Caribbean, you're writing about Europe or white patriarchy in Europe, as well as what's going on in Northern Africa, that would almost by default elevate, who you are as a scholar.
I'm always going off topic. I don't know, but there's a show on Netflix, Lupin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's just, I don't know. But this guy, it's about, an African man, but his whole life is just, basically all these French people. Like, that's one of the criticisms. It's a good show. One of the criticisms of the show is that he doesn't have any other Black people in his life except for his father. Like, no one's like, he doesn't have a cousin, an aunt, a sister. His whole life is just like, it's a very white.
Yeah, his father's not really in his life. He died.
Right, he's not even right. He died, actually, right.
Yeah.
And so and it's a good story, but the whole story is just this Black man in this very white world that he seems comfortable in. And, I don't know. I'm reading this book, and this is how it just feels like that for me. And I don't want to keep criticizing him because I don't want it to seem like, I don't like the book because I do, but I just would want, I'm gonna keep saying it, just like more.
Yeah.
Just more. Yeah.
And it
just feels like a Black man in a white world.
And it's interesting that you bring up Lupin because I feel like that show is an average show that received a lot of attention
Yeah.
At least average to me. I mean, I watched it, I wouldn't watch it again.
No, and it was like silly a lot. So no, it's okay. We don't have
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
But there is that sort of elevated status that character has of being that Black man in this sort of white world. And he's living both in the underworld as well as like a legit world. So that is interesting analogy. Does anyone have anything else to add before we kind of wrap things up? I normally don't talk this much, though, so my throat is hurting.
I just feel like I have to say something about what you were just saying, Rachel, about the actor and the story of Lupin. And so this weekend, I watched the movie on Netflix, Takedown, in which Omar Sy is also like the main character. And I noticed, and it's interesting that you raised it, Rachel, because in this movie, it's on Netflix, he's also, in this movie, he's a Black cop. And he's also like, they make him very non-sexualized. And that's very interesting. I was thinking about it after I saw the movie. And that's why I think it's connected to the conversation. It's like, who is the Black man? And they almost like bend over backwards in both the movies, I think, you know, Lupin and this other movie, Takedown, to make sure that the Black man is not threatening. Like this character, he's so lovable, everybody loves him. He's like, you know, these things are funny, but they make a point of making him non-threatening. And one of the ways they do that is he's a father in both Lupin and in this movie Takedown. He's a father of a young, like, teenage boy, and there's no sex. Like in the one about, you know, Lupin, like he's got this white wife, but they're divorced, you know, or they're separated, but you don't see him having sex with anybody. And in this Takedown, they make this point of him, like there's a scene where the cops are he and his partner cop, who's also white, that's interesting, go to interview this like pole dancer, you know, in a strip club. And Lupin, Omar Sy, sends the white detective down. And there's this whole thing about how, no, you go down. Like he can't, like, because he goes first and he sees her and she's like, you know, dressed to be pole dancing. You know, she's got like, you know, thongs on and like little things on her, you know, tetas and, you know, and he's like, oh, I got to get out of here. And then he sends the white guy down, and then the white guy is having the conversation and he's flirting with her, and, you know, because she's this gorgeous, beautiful, naked woman. But I thought it was really interesting. Like, why did they have to desexualize him, you know, as a character in that movie? Like that he doesn't even want to look at a white woman's body. But why did they have to even create that scene, create that character, the pole dancer, to set that up to desexualize him? I think it's very related to what we're talking about in the book, you know, about Black men with a penis, you know, are a threat. And so to make this actor very popular, like you were saying, Ron, they've managed to desexualize him as a Black man so that they can make him so popular, because then he's not threatening. He's not threatening to white women, you know, and it's the same trope. You know, it's so interesting. It's just the same trope, you know, that the Black man is a threat. You know,
it's interesting you say that, because today I was thinking about that whole aspect of the Black body. Now, a large Black dark-skinned man is a threat, but a large Black light-skinned man is not. Think about that.
What about Terrence Howard? He's probably a threat.
Oh, he's a threat to everybody.
I think he's
But The Rock, what's his name? His real name, Rock. Let's face
yeah,
it,
you're right.
he's gotten far. He has built his whole career on his size. You know, so that's something I'm looking at too, where certain hues within Blackness are acceptable and there are other hues that are not.
Mhm.
And that's another thing we got to look at too, that colorism, not only in Black community, but in Asian communities, South Asian community, and how internal colonization has caused that, and how colonization has permeated to exist where we can't even get rid of it now.
Mhm.
Think about it. We're having a topic that we didn't even create or produce, but we got to live with. Something wrong with that picture.